Catapulting Commissions family, what's up, team? Welcome back to this week's episode. I'm your host, Anthony Garcia. So we have gone through everything we've had in 2021. We have brought some amazing sales professionals, entrepreneurs, leadership coaches. We had social media selling. And today's guest is going to help address one of the challenges that many salespreneurs, companies, regardless of size, face. Everyone wants to increase sales. They want to grow revenue. They want their team making higher commissional dollars, but sometimes they're lacking one fundamental part. We're going to dive into that. Now, let me tell you about our guest today. Our guest is the CEO of Business Success Factors. Now, he has 3 college degrees. He has been working in sales since he could possibly start working, supporting himself through college by selling music equipment to colleges and universities. Also, some of the world's biggest bands, such as Aerosmith, Boston, Billy Joel, the Eagles. He's also a veteran serving 12 years in the U.S. Army, so I'm completely humbled and honored to have him with us today just for that alone. After that, he became a top-selling sales representative for a $2 billion company, and then he took all of his experience, created his own consulting and auditing firm, and now he's traveled out of 47 of the 50 states, 14 countries, where some of his clients have included Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Nationwide, Intuit, Procter & Gamble, CBS Television. He has also served as an independent president of sales and training for companies such as Tony Robbins, Chet Holmes, and Russ Whitney. His efforts collectively generated over $500 million in sales, and his last client alone generated $3 million in new sales in 5 weeks. Catapulting Commissions family, let me introduce you to Doug Brown.
Anthony, thank you for having me on. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take your introduction and use that going forward for everything. I appreciate that.
Not a problem, buddy. Take it. The next keynote, just put that voice over, man. You'll get the room moving.
For sure.
All right, Doug. So let's jump into this. So as the CEO of Business Success Factors, right? I can't help. We do some research. I get my guests. I do some research on you. I find you on LinkedIn, and you are the most highly acclaimed sales revenue growth expert. And when I hear that, and it's such a treat to have you on the Catapulting Commissions podcast. We have companies who've reached out to me directly, who've reached out to people who've been on the show and said, "Hey, I need help growing sales." Not necessarily in the art of hand-to-hand combat of here's how we teach sales, here's how to handle objections, which we all do, but they just want to know what's that strategy to get there. Can you talk us a little bit about that? How do companies first create that vision and then execute an increase in revenue?
So the first place they start with the vision is exactly what you just said. What is the vision? What is the truthful vision, though? Not the honest vision, right? They're different. One's subjective, one is objective. We can measure it. That's the truth. So I think you and I, we were talking earlier about this. It's like, what are the goals of actually achieving revenue growth? What do they want to achieve around revenue growth? Is it they want to achieve revenue growth because they want more cash flow? They want more profitability. They want to exit the company. They want to increase the valuation of the company. Is it that and more, right? So what are the truthful goals that we want to accomplish, and realistically in what time frame? I mean, so once we get really clear about that, then what we have to do is assess the situation. What do we have now? What are we missing? What are those blind spots that might trip you up, the constraining factors? All of that has to be assessed up front. And what ends up happening is from there, we can build a growth plan that actually makes sense and is achievable. So what I see a lot of companies doing, they go, well, you know what, I'm a $5 million company. I want to be a $10 million company. That's their goal, right? But then when I dig a little bit, it's really, they want to get from 5 to 6, right? Because they have this vision in their mind, like, oh, 10's going to get me there. But in reality, what they're looking for is to increase their cash flow. So if we can get them from 5 to 6, but increase their cash flow by increasing their profitability, let's say 5 or 10%, then all of a sudden they can hit their objectives that they're looking to do for that next year. Doesn't mean they don't want to go to 10 million, but in what time frame, right? I mean, I had one gent say he wanted to go from a $3 million company to a $53 million company in 1 year. And after talking with him, I said, hey, okay, that's a lot of growth. What kind of budget do you have that, you're going to be able to put toward marketing? Oh, we don't have anything for that. What kind of processes do you have for the scaling of that type of growth? We don't have any of that either, and it's like, okay, well, let's talk about what you do have, and then let's build a plan off of that. And in the reality, this gentleman was happy with another $1 million worth of growth. But a lot of people get these visions of grandeur in their head. And I'm never one to say, hey, it can't happen. I mean, I've had companies, go from 48 million to 110 million in 2 years, under the things that we've done. So it can happen. It just is, what are the resources and what are you committed to doing?
I think gaining that clarity up front totally paints that CEO or that board of directors or whoever's steering the boat to gain some true expectation. And I like how you separate it. You said there's truthful goals and there's honest goals, truthful goals and realistic goals, right? I mean, everybody wants to grow, right? And you're kind of like, well, where do you want to be 12 months, 6 months versus 2 years? But you mentioned something as you were describing this sales growth plan. You discussed that there was blind spots. And I would anticipate that some of these blind spots, many of my audience, the listeners of Catapulting Commissions, might not even be able to identify them right now. Can you walk us through that blind spots of that sales growth project or the sales process in general?
Oh yeah, well there's a plethora of them that can creep up, right? But I mean, if you take what ends up happening, I'll answer it this way and then give you some examples as per your question. There's about 10 facets to growing sales and sales revenue. But the challenge for most companies they're focused myopically on 1, 2, sometimes 3. I don't find too many companies that are focused on 8 or 10 of them, right? And those companies are the companies we generally look at and we go, oh, geez, they're this big company or whatever. So what ends up happening a lot of times is most people focusing on something like getting new clients, right? That's their main driver. We got to get new clients. We got to get new clients. We got to get new clients. But the blind spot can be, okay, what are we doing about increasing the buying frequency of those existing clients that we already have? Because maybe we don't need all that many new clients to achieve our goal. What are we doing about the past clients? What are we doing about people who are dormant? People who have bought from us? Because, on average, statistics say about 62% of our base will stick and about 38% will not. They'll attrit off over time. But if you look back at 2, 3, 4, 5 years, there are relationships just sitting there wanting to do business again, but nobody's contacting them. So it could be blind spots like that. It could be follow-up, for example. The average company will follow up once, maybe twice with their client, right? Even in the prospecting stage, the average salesperson follows up once or twice. Half of people statistically don't follow up at all. But if you look at all the statistics, all the things that have been published and real life experiences from my end, on a cold lead, it may take 8 to 15 tries to actually get that cold lead to actually buy from you. So the challenge is a lot of companies in their sales teams are picking off the easy stuff and they're leaving the other stuff that will close over time, but it never closes because what ends up happening in follow-up is you're actually prepping your clients to go buy from your competitors when you're not following up. That's a blind spot. Because let's say you followed up, I think it's like 13% of sales teams ever follow up more than 3 times, right? So those 87%, you might have a buyer who's ready to go on the 4th or 5th contact, but they've only been contacted 2 or 3 times. And all of a sudden a competitor calls upon them. We've already prepped them with everything they need to know. So they go, yeah, you know what? I'll buy from ABC company versus XYZ company. And that's what they do. So there's a lot of different blind spots along the path. Those are just several of them. And, but they're blind spots. Big companies can't see them. They're on the inside and they need an outside pair of eyes looking in going, guys, why do you have, 5 wheels on your car, right? Like what is most people have 4. Oh, we didn't know we had that fifth wheel, right? No wonder we can't turn corners like we wanted to because it's in the wrong place. So it's one of those things that's where the assessment process really helps out, because we really can look at the people, we can look at the skills, we can look at the process and the system behind it and make sure that we can optimize anything within.
You know, hearing that outside perspective looking in, it's one of those things that nobody likes originally, right? No one wants to be audited. No one wants to have that outside eyes looking in. But if I want to grow my company, if I want to scale my company to $10 million and I haven't done it yet, I probably need some help. And so to hear that perspective on identifying those blind spots, I think that's something of so much value, of just who is auditing the vision of the company, who's auditing the sales process, and specifically with this sales process, when you go on, when you work with a company who comes in and says, Doug, I want you to help our company grow, how much of your time is spent revamping their process versus creating your own? I mean, is this something that you come with a proprietary process for them, or are you revamping what they already have in place?
It could be both, right? Because it's a formula more than a process.
Okay.
So what parts of, we're trying to make this delicious, I love chocolate cake. We're trying to make this delicious chocolate cake, right? But there's a few missing ingredients. Okay, well, then we just have to change the ingredients to what, grandma used to make, so to speak, right? So, and then all of a sudden the chocolate cake tastes amazing, right? Or it could be that you have too many ingredients in the chocolate cake, and that's, skewing the taste to a certain place. So it could be anything within a company. A lot of times what I find is that they have blind spots that have got them stuck. So I'll give you an example. And usually, by the way, it's only usually a few different things that can open that up. Right. I mean, I have one gentleman, he went from 5.7 million to 8.2 million in 3 weeks. And I told him not to do it because his operations couldn't handle it. but he wanted the sales idea, and he promised me he wouldn't implement it, and he did. And he went from 5.7 to 8.2 in 3 weeks. However, his company was completely out of their mind at that point. He had, operations people threatening to leave, et cetera, et cetera. So part of the plan is timing too, right? Like, we don't want to just lay in all these growth strategies if we can't handle the deliverable on the back end, because upset clients and you end up not growing as much. But I have one client in particular, the one I mentioned before, they went from 48 million to 110 million. And the one blind spot that they had, now this was a company that was generating a lot of leads online. They had, almost 100 salespeople. And what was happening was, you may laugh at this, Anthony, but being the sales guru you are, is that 62% of their incoming leads, I measured from stage 0 to stage 1, which is the first contact. And then from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, and so on. 62% of the leads coming in never made it into stage 1 because the salespeople weren't contacting them.
Holy wow. I would lose my mind if that was happening.
Well, the crazy part is, if we could get them into stage 1, it was a pretty much a static rate that went into stage 2. And from stage 2, we could figure out the exact close rate that was going to happen with this company, because it was just, the numbers just made sense. So when I spoke to the owner and I said, hey, I got good news, I got bad news, and he wouldn't believe me. He was like, there is no way that 62% of my leads are not being worked. It's not happening. So I took all the data, put it on his desk, and said, call me when you're ready. 2 days later, he called me back, said, we got to fix this problem. So I said, okay, how do you fix it? Well, we came up with a way of fixing it. We tied compensation to the actual, getting them from stage 0 into stage 1. We started exposing people publicly, those who were not doing it. I mean, there was all kinds of, just basic tactics to get motivation going on in the sales team. Well, in the first month, it went from 62% down to 25% not being followed up. And then in the second month, we even closed it more. And what happened was he started seeing this immense push in revenue because people were pushing it through the process that we were now measuring. So in some cases, that was revamping, for example. And the first case going from 5.7 to 8.2 million, that was about creating something new, right, that he didn't have. So it could be either or both.
I hearing that. I mean, sometimes it's just you get what you measure, right? I mean, you took a program he had, 62% of the leads weren't being called. I would jump off a bridge if my team wasn't calling 62% of the, and I shouldn't even say that because they might not be. I should probably audit myself because as I'm saying that, I'm like, man, I'm sure there's somebody in my organization that's not doing that, or that's probably in that line. But back to the point, you get what you measure. So you put a highlight on, here's the deficiency and here's how we can improve it. Other situations, you help revamp, you build an entirely new program. As you're building this sales program or this growth strategy, how much is it of hiring a top performing salesperson versus cultivating and coaching? I mean, are you saying, hey, this team we're cut bait on this sales team, or we're bringing in a new team? I mean, how do you identify? Because somebody has to execute this. So we've created the strategy, but how do you identify who's going to be the guy bringing us home on this?
So again, what's the good cover?
Yep.
So again, it depends on the goals, right? So it depends on the goals of what the company is looking to do, the truthful goals. So in one client that I had, I had to report to him, look, about 2/3 of your sales team is going to defect over the next 60 days. They've had it with you, right? So, and again, the owner's like, no, that's never going to happen. I'm like, I promise you, this is what the assessment and the audit, even though like you said, a lot of people don't like to have this done, but it reveals the reality. And so he said, nope, not going to happen. Almost 2 months to the day after I delivered the findings, he called me and he said, I've lost over 60% of my sales team to a competitor. And I said, let me guess their names. I told you what they were, X, Y, Z, right? Because what's happening is the owner was more of a dictator versus dictatorial, type of behavior. And people were just getting fed up with that. So in his case, what ended up happening is I ended up hiring back about 2/3 of the people that left. Now, why would I do that? Well, they were already experienced. They didn't hate what they were doing. They just didn't like how they were being treated disrespectfully. So we ended up bringing those people back. And one of the ways I love doing this, Anthony, is I use sales-specific assessments that determine the sales DNA of the individual. So when we were bringing them back, some of the people actually were in the wrong positions originally. Right? They had people that were supposed to be like heavy cold callers, but these people, did not handle rejection well. So we moved them more into a client growth role or a farming role, if what people would call. So sometimes it's just adjusted, and sometimes it's just clear you got to get rid of all these people, and sometimes it's just one or two people within the organization. They're top performers, but they're really disruptive to the rest of the organization. And so you might have to move them down the trough a little bit, or, relocate them on an island somewhere. And when we do those type of things, a lot of times the productivity of the actual sales team in full picks up. So there's all kinds of ways of doing this, but, again, it's a combination of sometimes hiring top performers, but it depends on, where they're looking to grow to, and top performers, let's just get that out on the table. They're not the easiest to find, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're looking and even if you can find them, the question is, okay, if you want top performers, is that company that's actually there to recruit these top performers, they want A players. Are they an A player company?
Ooh.
Right? Are they set up to actually be able to retain an A player? Do they have the onboarding process? Do they have the training process? Do they have the ongoing coaching process? Is this top performer going to be walking into an operational structure that if they go and increase sales by 20% immediately, that operations can handle the push, right? They're going to look at these things. Are they an A player company? Now, you might be able to fool the A player to bring them in, but they're not going to stay if it's not set up to be an A player. So a lot of times on hiring top producers like this, I actually have to work with the company to make sure they're set up to actually be able to handle that top producer or a team of top producers.
I mean, that's such a gut check. I mean, everybody wants that A player, but nobody wants to admit they're not an A player company, right? As you're saying that, I just can't help think of what the NBA has become, where basketball players are leaving for like these championship caliber teams. But the reality is, I believe it. I've experienced it. And I'm glad you said it. Is that still exists with us hiring and trying to retain or attract these dominant people. But let's just spin that for a second. Let's say I do have an A dominant company where I do have the structure, the comp plan, the vision. I mean, everything's aligned. How do I attract and retain that A player that we've identified? And what characteristics, I guess the two-part question, what characteristics are you looking for when you're saying this guy's going to be, or this girl's going to be successful in this company?
Oh, let me go to the last one first, because that's where we would start, right? Mm-hmm. Again, getting truthful. What is that real description of that persona? What is the A player actually able to achieve? It doesn't mean that A players, for example, sometimes they're looking for, what did I read this morning? I'll paraphrase it. Behind every business objective, there is a personal objective. So what can A players expect? Sometimes it's not like A players, if they're going to run into resistance, are always, they're going to object to that. Sometimes A players love that type of environment, right? Because they're like, okay, you know what? We're going to grow. We're going to show this industry. We're going to show the competition, and they're, highly competitive. So it just depends on what the goal is. Now, that can be anything. I mean, and so every company, when we talk about, are you set up as an A player company, what is the truthful role of an A player within that company? And is it to, win back clients? Is it to, go out there and just blaze a trail and, start a whole new process? Is it to start an independent agency of top salespeople out there, right? There's all kinds of missions for A players. So we have to define, though, firstly, what is an A player clearly in the company? Because A players, when they come to the process, they're going to expect that the delivery is exactly what they were told. So once you understand that, then the part of recruiting them is, okay, in between that and this question, the other thing is, when we are assessing A players, we have to have, just like we would lead score, we have to have a recruiting score, right? So, and it has to be consistent across the base, right? So we have to have the same questions that we ask people. We have to have all of those things that we can measure those metrics against what we're looking for as the benchmark of an A player. So once we have all of that set up, then finding them, well, where do they hang out, right? Now that we have the clear persona, where do they hang out? And it may not be, on major websites. Monster's probably not going to be your best friend to find an A player. So, there are sales specific websites, but there might be organizations, or there might be places that they like to frequent. When I worked with Tony Robbins and worked with Chet Holmes, we wanted A players, but we were looking for people who were highly competitive, because it was a highly competitive industry in a highly competitive environment. So a lot of times we would look and say, okay, is this person an athlete? We wanted discipline too. So is this person an athlete? Is this person, a chess champion? We would look at those traits. One of the biggest mistakes I see, Anthony, in people hiring is they're in too much of a rush. So they don't step back and put in a defined process that's measurable. And so they say, well, we got to have somebody in 2 or 3 months, right? Oh, A players are busy, guys. They're, they may be open, but a lot of them have lots of opportunity already going on. They're constantly being recruited by people. So, are we better off taking 5 months and finding the right person, or 3 months and then having that person wash out in a month or two, and then hiring another one for 3 months and wash out for a month or two, and another one? So, are we going to hire 4 people over the year to get the right one? Or are we going to just be a little bit more patient and be very calculated about before we make the hiring offer? Because one of the biggest mistakes I see, Anthony, with companies in this, they hire because they like them. They like them. It's like, okay, I agree that they're likable, but can they actually do the job? Right. So this is why I love to use sales specific assessments for, again, determining what the outcome is, right? Because we can objectively measure, is this or is this not? Is this person got the traits and they're trainable, or they're not trainable? Because they might have the traits, but they're just going to be a disruption to the company. And, maybe a disruption to your clientele, because they might be a little bit more abrasive than we want them to be in a certain situation. They have bad doctor's bedside manner. They might be the most brilliant doctor in the world, but then they just upset the whole staff and upset all the patients and everything else, right? So it really comes into ideal fit and getting clear on that persona in the beginning.
Hearing you address that from the beginning, I don't think I've ever heard it put that way, where I know it exists because I manage a team and I've hired people, and I'm like, okay, what are my expectations? But to really craft that A person, it's almost like you're creating that avatar of who that person is before they get there. Yeah. And then once you have them, they're not hanging out on Monster. A players are, you're recruiting an A player. I tell anybody who's a sales manager, sales leader, the moment you have that A player candidate in front of you, just assume there's someone else waiting to have the next conversation with them when they get off the Zoom call or walk out of your office. Because, we've been there. I'm sure you've been there before, Doug. I've been there before. Where you're like, man, I have multiple companies or multiple offers. I'm going to go with where I fit best. And hearing that you discredit that likability factor, not discredit, but just say, hey, that can't be the ultimate decision-making process. I love that, because I hire people, and people ask, how important is the likability? I have to like you. I have to like you. But at the same time, it's not just that. I have to know that at the end of the day, that you're going to get the objective done. And the reason I love a career in sales is it's incredibly black and white. The numbers are what they say they are. Your job is to hit 100% the plan, 120% the plan. 119 is not 120. 99 is not 100. It's just crystal clear. So when you delay that, when you have that ability to take that likability factor out, it's pretty impactful. And hearing you say, put a button on it, people rush to it. I've never rushed to hire somebody, except one time in my life I was rushed to hire somebody. It was an internal transfer, and I had my hand forced that, hey, this guy is the absolute killer that your sales team needs. And there was no due diligence on my process. I was the direct manager, but that person fizzled out in 4 months and was a tornado on my team. And I went back to my VPs and my CEOs. I was like, hey guys, this is why this is why my process takes 5 months, 6 months, because I'm vetting this person multiple times, because the moment they sign the line on the name, it's a marriage, they're mine, and I can't just walk away. So, man, great insight there, Paul. Or Doug. Why did I call you Paul? I was thinking of somebody else.
Well, Paul's probably a great guy too. So.
Oh man, yeah. So sorry. The interview before was a guy named Paul, and it popped up on my screen. So anyhow, we'll chop that one and edit that one out. All right. So, Doug, as we're coming here on the end, I wouldn't be doing some due diligence here. I can't help but notice win-win selling. You brought a book to market, and it's unlocking your power for profitability by resolving objections. Now, I will say this, and I'm sure you've heard it throughout times in your career. I've heard it as my time as a consultant, as my time as a sales manager, and I get a phone call with whatever the customer's objection is. And I can guarantee you, when I hear it, I'm like, you're not the first or the last person that's going to call me with that. But it seems to be an issue that still exists today in 2021. Can you talk us a little bit about the win-win selling method and how we're handling objections?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about objections so the way the book came about, Anthony, was I was looking for a really good book on objections, but not just a book that would say, okay, if you had this said to you, parrot this back. Because I noticed throughout my life when I would do that, especially earlier on in my career, sometimes that would work and sometimes it would just frankly upset people, right? So I wanted a book, or I wanted resources on why did objections even happen? What is the human component that, behind this? I couldn't find anything. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wrote it on the psychology and the philosophy behind why objections form. And, back in the old days of sales, we were taught to crush the objection, right? Come top down on the objection. Well, that doesn't work well today.
No.
Right. But a lot of people is still in that frame from the past. Even the sales training methodologies that are going on, they'll teach you to come down, top down. And that was just never me. I always figured you got to help the client. Somebody told me one time, sales actually in Norwegian means to serve, something like that. Right. So I was like, okay. So the reason I called it win-win and the reason I wrote it in the capacity I did is because I wanted to give people formulas, not just tactics. And so I go back through the history of how an objection forms. They form in our childhood, right? We are taught by whatever, mom, dad, preacher, teacher, brother, sister, whatever, right? A lot of times, and I give examples in the book, of how these things form. And so let's say that somebody grew up in an environment, for example, where they were taught to negotiate at every single turn. They grew up in that type of family. I grew up in an Italian type of family. They were very loud and worked with their hands all the time. But a lot of them were negotiators. Right. So I grew up in the Italian Jewish side of the family, and a lot of them were negotiators. So the natural propensity for somebody who grew up in that environment is to constantly negotiate because they were rewarded for negotiating the right way. But take a salesperson who grew up in that environment. That is their frame. Now they meet someone else who's a very quick decision maker. In the profile test, they would be called high D, right? And those type of tests. Director. I make a decision like this, whack. Okay, sales closed. Guess what that salesperson is going to tend to do now that the sales closed? They're going to go back and they're going to want to renegotiate. Right? So flip the model though. Let's say that the salesperson is the director type and the other person is the high negotiator. And the high negotiator needs to negotiate, but the high director is going to want to close that sale quickly. Can you see how conflict can start at this point?
100%.
Right? So what ends up happening is we have two frames that collide. And we want the sale. So, and the person on the other end might want the sale as well. But what ends up happening is personalities collide. And then inside the buyer's head, it's like, okay, I'm uncomfortable. There's some discomfort going on here. I'm feeling something. Maybe it's fear. It's emotion that's kicking in at this point. So what do? They throw out an objection, right? They go, wow, your pricing's too high.
Right.
Right? Oh, I dealt with somebody like this before, right? Whatever it is. And now here's the crazy part. The buyer may not even know why they're actually objecting, except they feel this uncomfortable feeling. So the root of all objections is actually fear, whether it's large or small. And so what I teach people to do is address the personal need as well as the corporate objective. And because if we don't address the personal need, even though it's the greatest deal, and I know people listening to this have ever had this happen, it's like the price was right, the situation was right, everything was right, but they even had the money, but they didn't move forward. And they kept throwing out objections. Anytime you're getting that, folks, ask yourself this one question. Well, first thing, by the way, breathe, right? Because if you don't breathe and just take a moment to pause, what will end up happening is you'll try to overcome the objection. It's just our natural thing that we do. We did this as children. Mom, dad would say something, I don't appreciate this is happening, right? And as a child, well, mom and dad, and we just try to defend it immediately because we didn't want to get into trouble. Versus going, yeah, you're right, right? So if we breathe first and then we think and we ask this question to ourselves, what could be the 5 top reasons this person might be saying what they're saying to me? That will interrupt the pattern of habitual behavior in the frame enough on the selling side so that we can think clearly. And now we can go, well, maybe it's this, or it could be possibly this. Guess what? Now we're going to get curious, not confrontational. We're going to go back and we're going to ask questions of curiosity. It's going to get that person to open up because that's what we're looking for. Now, again, the more you can get them to open up, the more they're going to self-discover what's going on their side, and you can help them navigate to what I call the real it. What is the real issue that's going on, right? And that could be the salesperson is irritating the other person on the side of the desk. Well, okay, let's get that out and let's resolve that. So it's a win-win fashion, right? So I wrote the whole book around that whole premise. And it's really a book on communications more than on resolving objections. So what I found, Anthony, is that people who have, read the book, they'll comment in and they'll say, you know what, this was the best thing I ever read because of my kids. I communicate better with my kids now, because they were playing parent. The child is grown up. The child is now 18 years old and they're still trying to play parent. And the child's going, I'm an adult, So it's a different frame. So that's what I wrote the book about. The book's been really well received and I'm actually quite proud of it.
Dude, well, awesome. I mean, I see great reviews on Amazon. I actually just ordered a copy myself. winwinsellingbook.com. Do not miss that, Catapulting Commissions family. Doug, I can't help but hear when you say, and I don't want to quote you incorrectly, so I want to ensure I'm going to look at my notes here, but the root of all objections is fear. And to hear you say that is so enlightening. I think Catapulting Commissions family, you need to hear that. When you reach out to either me or Doug or whoever is in your sphere of influence with an objection that you can't handle, just remember what Doug said, which is 100% accurate. The root of all objections is fear. That's a great one. We're going to call that our tweetable moment for the show. So
thank you.
Yeah, we are going to get that. So, Doug, as we wrap this show up, man, I appreciate you joining us. How can the Catapulting Commissions family track you down, get to learn about you a little bit more, learn a little bit about business success factors, all the nine? Where do we find you at?
Well, you certainly can come to the website, www.businesssuccessfactors.com. If somebody wants to sort of self-diagnose, how are they doing in marketing and sales, send me an email at doug@businesssuccessfactors.com. Say, hey, I want the marketing and sales checklist. And I'll send that out and they can self-assess, see where they're at. They can find me on LinkedIn at Doug Brown 1234 on LinkedIn. If that doesn't come up, just type in Doug Brown, Berklee College of Music. For some reason, Berklee College of Music comes up every single time. I never graduated from Berkeley. I went to Berkeley, but all the places I graduated from, the 3 degrees, they don't come up. I don't know why. It's the algorithm. So, and then if they want a copy of the book, please, go to winwinsellingbook.com and pick up the book. And let me know. Send you questions. We're pretty open. We're a boutique company, so we get back to people and we build relationships.
Awesome. Well, Doug, I appreciate you being here, Catapulting Commissions family. Doug was another phenomenal guest. Be sure to go pick up Win-Win Selling, unlocking your abilities to, and I don't want to butcher your tagline, unlocking your power for profitability by resolving objections. Win-Win Sales book. You will find the link for that in the show notes. Be sure to comment, go get connected, follow Doug and Catapulting Commissions family. I will see you next week.